Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Boris. I'm here with Free Press beat writer Evan Petzold. Maybe I can learn how to speak this week. That would really help us out. Pretty interesting week. The Chicago White Sox, I think, brought us back from the edge of the cliff. But how you making out there? Not a really fun week before Friday. A lot of bad baseball. Tell me how you're enduring what has become a massively disappointing last 8 weeks of the baseball season.
Could you imagine if Carson Kelly wouldn't have hit the 2-run home run on Friday and the Tigers would have lost 1-0 to the White Sox? They won 2-1 on Friday, and then they lost on Saturday, and then they got the big win on Sunday. But yeah, things aren't going great for the Tigers. It was a 2-4 record this week, 0-3 against the Atlanta Braves at Truist Park, and then 2-1 against the Chicago White Sox at Comerica Park. And it was 6 runs in 6 games before the Tigers scored 11 runs in Sunday's game. It's like this horrifyingly bad offense that continues to roll on with these like once a week days where there's this random pop-up success that comes out of nowhere. And now the Tigers are going to have to face the Philadelphia Phillies with the Phillies coming to town. You know, they're one of the best teams in all of baseball. And so it could be a tough 3 games coming up for the Tigers. Offense hasn't been great. There's been these random games where they're scoring double-digit runs. Again, it's 3 double-digit runs in their last 13 games, but then they also have stretches of, again, scoring 6 runs in 6 games. It's kind of incredible at just how bad they've been offensively. And then they have the one random, really good game. So we'll see if they can build on that momentum because they definitely need to. The big problem is that the Tigers have a 31-41 record since their 5-0 start to the season. That's a 69 win pace for a full 162 game season. That's not good enough. So where the Tigers are at right now, it's 5 games under 500, 14 games back of first place in the American League Central, 5.5 games back of the final spot in the AL wild card. Tigers are continuing to slip. It's a problem. It's not looking great for their postseason chances. Cleveland Guardians are at 49-26, 5-game winning streak. Minnesota Twins, they're at 43-35. Winners in 10 of their last 14 games. Shortstop Carlos Correa is hitting .429 with a 1.117 OPS in his last 17 games. Absolutely crushing. Kansas City Royals at 42-37. They've fallen off a little bit lately because of the bullpen struggles, but they're still firmly ahead of the Tigers because you got the Tigers at 36-41 and then the lowly Chicago White Sox at 21-58, the worst record in baseball. So the Tigers are at 36-41. And they've got a long, long, long way to go if they want to catch the Cleveland Guardians. Again, 14 games back of first place in the AL Central, and it's not even the All-Star game break yet.
All right, so let's jump into a few things. Here's how goofy and terrible the Tigers' offense has been recently. Last 9 games, they've scored 0, 13, 1, 1, 1, 0, 2, 1. 11. So 7 games, 6 runs, 2 games, 24 runs. What is that telling you? And, it's just a level of terribleness that I don't even know what to say about it anymore.
Well, Mark, it tells me that it's a bad offense with some volatility because of the young players. Like, I do get that. Like, Colt Keith can hit. Riley Greene can hit. Like, there are guys in this lineup that can get the job done. But aside from a couple of young hitters, like the Tigers don't really have a whole lot going for them. When you got Mark Hanna and Gio Urshela hitting 3 to 5 in your lineup, when you got Matt Vierling leading off, like it's probably just not a good offense. Let's be honest here. So I think that's what it tells me. When you talk about the fact that they have these pop-up games where they're scoring a lot of runs, but then for the most part, it's pretty quiet. And that tells me that it's not a good offense. But it also tells me that there's enough, again, there's enough talent there that they do have the opportunity to break out. Like Gio Urshela is a professional hitter. Mark Hanna is a professional hitter. Okay. Now those guys are not middle of the order bats, but they're pro hitters, right? Riley Greene is a good hitter. Colt Keith has really come into his own. I mean, he's looking really good. And so I think you have enough pieces where they're talented guys. They can take advantage when a pitcher is a little bit erratic or when they're, playing into the Tigers game plan, when they're playing into the personal approach of the team that day. When pitchers make mistakes and then they're able to do damage on it, they're passing the baton. They're not swinging for the fences. Like there's enough talent in the lineup to have these random games, but not enough talent to be consistent. And that's the biggest thing with this, is it's just not a consistent enough lineup, and it's because there's not enough good hitters up and down. And there's really no like big middle of the order bat to carry them in the dark times, right? When things are going bad and you need a couple of big hits in big situations, the Tigers don't really have the guy to do that yet. I think Riley Greene can become that guy. There is still a lot of swing and miss in his game, so that kind of, plagues him in that way. But I still think they need that big middle of the order bat to be able to overcome some of these things. That was supposed to be Spencer Torkelson. Like, that guy's not here. So we'll see what it ends up becoming, but just not a good enough offense yet. That's really what it comes down to.
All right. I don't want to belabor this, but I'm going to go over a few important points about the month of June. In the month of June, Riley Greene is hitting .320. He's got a slash of .320, .393, .627 for over 1,000 OPS. Okay? It's actually 1,020 OPS. He's got a 1.1 WAR. He's got a 183 WRC plus. So he's been phenomenal. And we're actually going to get into that as part of the big two today, but not right this moment. Beyond that, you have an entire team where Carson Kelly has a 144 WRC plus for the month of June. And after that, they have not one single player who is over 100 WRC plus, and 100 WRC plus is basically league average. Every other player on the roster, Colt Keith included, Wenzel Perez, who's actually hitting .268 for the month, is below a WRC plus. You have players like Matt Verling hitting 195, a 60 WRC plus. Jakey Rogers hit 150 in the month of June so far, 48 WRC plus. You have Akil Baddoo hitting 111 for the month. Justin Henry Malloy, 156. Want to talk about embracing opportunity? I would say not so much. Mark Canha, 81 WRC plus. Gio Urshela, 86 WRC plus, which trails, by the way, the offensive juggernaut that is Zach McKinstry, hitting 200 for the month at an 89 WRC plus. He does have 2 homers. So at the end of the day, one of the other issues I did notice is, aside from Riley Greene and Akil Baddoo, who have both walked, and Justin Henry Malloy, the only way he ever reaches base really is walking, they have almost no other players that have a league average walk rate. They have Colt Keith at a 1.6 walk rate for the month of June. Zach McKinstry, 4.8% in all his at-bats. Jake Rogers at 2.4%. So basically, the fact that they don't get on base whatsoever is pretty much a function of the fact that they don't walk, pitchers challenge them, and they don't hit. And as far as why those reasons are, well, there's lots of those reasons, but mostly they're just not really very good hitters. Not in their careers. Some are young and learning their way in the game. Basically, the roster assembly and just the quality of offensive talent on the roster, especially with the injury to Kerry Carpenter, is just subpar.
Well, Mark, that's what I wrote, though, during, again, after the Braves series, that's what I wrote. Like, the offense that was built, it wasn't built to withstand demotions and injuries and underperformance. Like, if the Tigers wanted to have a season in which they were able to contend for the American League Central, Cleveland, Minnesota, Kansas City, they would have to struggle. But also the Tigers' offense, because we knew the pitching was going to be good. We knew the starting rotation was going to be good coming into the season. But the offense, everybody was going to have to take a step forward. That was Spencer Torkelson, Parker Meadows, Kerry Carpenter, Riley Greene. Colt Keith was going to have to hit as a rookie. And that all those things, they haven't happened. Like, Spencer Torkelson is in AAA Toledo. Parker Meadows is in AAA Toledo. Kerry Carpenter has the long-term back injury. He's been out for a while, and he's not coming back until the end of July. So, and Colt Keith, he's gone through his lumps and his ups and downs. So for the Tigers offense to be good this season, everything had to go right. And a lot of things have gone wrong. So that's been the biggest thing, is just the offense wasn't built to withstand these demotions, injuries, underperformance, and it's coming back to bite the Tigers. You just look at the standings and you see right where they're at.
What bothers me about it, though, Av, is every team has issues. Every team has young players that struggle. I mean, they're not the only team that has these issues, to be really blunt about it. So the problem is, they've had some bad luck, but at the same time, they've also had players that have just massively underperformed, and maybe the construction of the team and the roster was not very well thought out or very successfully executed. All right, let's get into the big two. Colt Keith is hitting .315 since May 6th. What are we seeing? Do we need to worry about him? And what do we expect moving forward? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, coming into the season, a lot of pressure on Colt Keith, right? He signs his club-friendly deal, but it's still $28.6 million guaranteed over 6 years. And if he really wants to cash in, he needs to perform for the deal to be worth $82 million over 9 years. This is a guy who hit .306 with 27 homers in AA Erie and AAA Toledo last season. Scott Harris, Tigers president of baseball operations, who you were just discussing when it comes to building the roster, he felt comfortable signing Colt Keith to the long-term extension because he believed in Colt's ability to make quick adjustments in the minor leagues. He thought that would translate to the major leagues. We saw that in AAA Toledo last year when AAA pitchers dominated Keith with changeups, forcing him to his front side until he made an adjustment to get more towards his backside and be a little bit more neutral in his stance, which he did, and then he raked in Toledo. So adjustments have been the story of his rookie season. I think what he's doing is really impressive, and in the way that he's been able to make the adjustments, I'm not worried about Colt Keith at all moving forward. I think Colt Keith has found it. I think he's found out how he's going to adjust in this league. This is a guy who hit 152 with 0 homers and a .399 OPS from March 28th through May 5th. But since then, Colt Keith is hitting .315 with 4 home runs and an .811 OPS in 38 games from May 6th through June 23rd. His .131 WRC plus since May 6th, that ranks second among MLB second basemen with at least 130 plate appearances in that stretch of games. That means he's been 31% better than league average offensively since May 6th. So he started with this toe tap in early May to calibrate his timing. And then over the past month plus, he's continued to make more adjustments to the load of his swing to keep his body in a comfortable hitting position. The key for him is keeping his head still throughout the load of his swing. But what's interesting too is that he's made adjustments before games, he's made adjustments after games. But what really stands out to me is that sometimes he's making adjustments to his swing while standing in the batter's box during games. That's a sign of a great hitter. Great hitters are able to make adjustments mid-game, pitch to pitch at times, right? So he's able to use his hands to control the barrel. His eyes help him avoid chase. He has elite hands and elite eyes. And making these adjustments have helped him avoid prolonged slumps. He's got 3 4-hit games this season, May 17th, June 15th, and then Sunday against the White Sox. He's tied for third with Mookie Betts and Francisco Lindor with 3 4-hit games among 94 hitters with at least 1 4-hit game this season. So Colt Keith, Mookie Betts, Francisco Lindor, all with 3 4-hit games. That trails only Luis Arraez, who has 5, and Will Smith, who has 4 on the 4-hit leaderboard this season. And when you want to talk about really good players, Luis Arraez, Will Smith, Mookie Betts, Francisco Lindor, they've combined for 14 All-Star selections, 11 Silver Slugger awards, 3 batting titles. I'm not saying that Colt Keith is going to be Luis Arraez or Mookie Betts, but I'm saying he's outperformed all 3 of those players since the beginning of May. He's been better than Luis Arraez, Mookie Betts, Francisco Lindor since the beginning of May when you look at their total WRC pluses. So again, I'm not saying that he's those players. I'm not saying that he's destined for greatness, but I'm saying maybe he is. Again, for a guy to have 3 4-hit games this early in his career, to see him make the adjustments to avoid really, really long stretches of slump coming off of that first really rough 30-game stretch of his career, I think it's really impressive, Mark. And that's why I'm not worried about Colt Keith. He's got the minor league track record. He's proven he can make adjustments. He has, 3 4-hit games. Guys don't do that. That's not normal. There are veterans who don't have 4-hit games. I think what we're seeing from Colt Keith is the real deal. I think it's here to stay. I think it's something to watch as we get into the second half of the season. And if you're a Tigers fan, it's something to be excited about long term. We've been all over Colt Keith, Mark, since the beginning. And he's proving it right now.
Well, what I really like about Colt Keith is the level of mental toughness that he's shown, in these first almost 80 baseball games. I mean, after he endured a terrible month of April and had a great month of May. He started the month of June off 1 for 23. He's since recovered and has his average up close to 260 for the month, knowing that he started 1 for 23. He also has 4 homers in his last 83 at-bats. That's a pace that's going to, if he's able to maintain that over a course of a season, would be, close to 25 home runs. So, all those things are very, very good. His walk rate a little low lately, but I think that's mostly because he's been in swing mode. But is swing mode really a bad thing for Colt Keith? I do think that historically he's shown a very good capacity to manage the strike zone. Does not strike out a lot. And I think over time, his walk rate will probably trend up, somewhere between 8 and 9% as a floor. So offensively, a lot of things to really like about Colt Keith. And as you said, he does have a variety of swings depending on the circumstances and depending on the pitcher. He went to a toe tap to try to get himself on time. He is now doing he's not abandoned it, but he has got a little bit more leg lift now and trying to hit for a little bit more power, and that's worked out well for him. I think the next thing we need to start working on for Colt Keith is a little improved defense, so at least he might be able to stay at second base at least for a while until other options provide themselves. But of all the things that have happened to the Detroit Tigers this year, Colt Keith is one of the best things, and really not somebody we should really worry too much about. He's shown that he can endure the bad times and make adjustments, and those are two things, if you want to be a good Major League Baseball player, you have to be able to do. All right, let's get to question number 2 of the Big Two. Does Riley Greene deserve more All-Star Game votes? What have you learned about his power surge? Let's talk about Riley Greene, because based upon the month he's having and just in general the season he's having, we deserve to talk about him.
Yeah, and he deserves all the love. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Riley Greene's hitting .261 with 15 home runs and an .852 OPS in 76 games this season. His .139 WRC plus ranks 17th in MLB this season, so that's 39% better than league average. It's directly below the 6 others outside of the top 10. Here are those 6 others: Josh Smith, Yordan Alvarez, Bobby Witt Jr., Carlos Correa, Jose Ramirez, and Rafael Devers. And then it's Riley Greene at number 17. So are you really telling me that Riley Greene is not an all-star? Like, his .139 WRC plus ranks 5th among AL outfielders. I mean, come on now. Like, what Riley Greene has done both for himself and for the Tigers has been incredible. Like, the fact that he wasn't among the top 20 AL outfielders based on fan votes when the first update of the balloting came out last Monday, I think is completely garbage. Fans need to vote for him because he deserves it. Okay? He deserves it. And what he's done for the Tigers has been just as impressive as what he's done across the entire league. Like, the Tigers haven't had Kerry Carpenter for 24 games. So Kerry Carpenter landed on the injured list May 29th with a lumbar spine stress fracture. Again, he's not coming back until the end of July probably, and they played 24 games since then. Riley Greene is hitting .326 with a 1.046 OPS. Everyone else on the Tigers is hitting .209 with a 6.05 OPS. Riley Greene has put the Tigers on his back and absolutely carried them over the last month of games. And so, yes, he's carrying the Tigers, but also he's performing among the likes of Yordan Alvarez, Bobby Witt Jr., Carlos Correa, Jose Ramirez, Rafael Devers. And I mean, again, he's been the 17th best player when it comes to offense. Defense is solid. He can move around and play all 3 positions. Like, Riley Greene is a really good player, and he deserves more votes. He should at least be among the top 20 AL outfielders. Like, I'm not saying that he needs to be an all-star, but at the same time, he deserves more votes. It's BS that he's not.
Well, to be honest with you, I think he probably will be an all-star. And since, while we're talking about defense, I do want to add that, he is a +9 in defensive run save. It's only a +1 in OAA because, he has some center field, negative OAA stats, but his defense has also been pretty exemplary, especially when he's playing left field. As far as what he's doing, doesn't get noticed because he plays for a really, really bad team. And I think we discussed that off the jump. I mean, the Tigers are one of the 5 worst teams, one of the 6 worst teams in baseball after their 5-0 start. So usually bad teams, it's pretty difficult for their best players, especially when they only really have 2 or 3 really, really good players, to get much notoriety. But I think we need to give Riley Greene some love. And, after some ups and downs and some struggles here and there, especially the last 3 weeks, he's been really, really good. And not only really good, but hitting for power.
And that's the big thing, is that he's hitting for power. That's the biggest difference in his game year over year when you look at what he did in 2022, 2023, and then now what he's doing in 2024. He has 15 home runs in 76 games in 2024 after 11 homers in 99 games in 2023 and 5 homers in 93 games in 2022. The power surge is not just like happenstance. This is by design. Riley Greene added 10 pounds of muscle this past offseason while working out with a new trainer named Ben De La Cruz. He runs a facility in Orlando, and Greene would basically travel from Oviedo to Lakeland to Orlando, which is basically driving all around Central Florida. So he spent his offseason living in Oviedo, did physical therapy in Lakeland, and then rehabbed and worked out in Orlando with Ben De La Cruz. De La Cruz ran the rehab and the workout programs in the offseason, while Duncan Evans, who works for the Tigers, did the physical therapy in Lakeland, with Riley coming back from the Tommy John surgery that he had in his non-throwing elbow. But again, getting Riley healthy from an elbow standpoint was one thing. Adding weight, adding muscle was a completely different thing. Like he added 10 pounds. He worked out harder than he's ever worked out before. But it was targeted. Like the programs that were written by Ben De La Cruz were super targeted to help Riley Greene improve his rotational strength in his hips, his lower back, his ankles. It was all by design that's allowed him to unleash more power. And as a result, he's hitting for more power than ever before. So I got a story coming out on that. I talked to Ben De La Cruz. He was great. Talked to Riley, a couple times now about, getting into this power and the work that he did in the offseason. That's coming out, freep.com. But this is a little teaser for it. And yeah, like it's made a huge difference. And Riley Greene deserves all the credit for seeking that out, for knowing what he wanted to improve, speed and strength, and going out there and being able to add the strength to his game that he hasn't had before. And this is the interesting thing too, is like Riley Greene is still a young player in the league. Like I understand that Riley Greene has been around for 3 seasons, but he's 23. He doesn't turn 24 until the end of September. So this is a young player who's still growing, who's still developing, who's still getting stronger. And the fact that he was able to go out of his comfort zone, find a new trainer, put a lot of trust in the new trainer to deliver results. And again, take what the trainer, the program that the trainer wrote and really implement those things. I think that speaks volume to who Riley Greene is. And also it's the reason why he's got 15 homers in 76 games this year. Like he's on pace for 30 plus homers. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens because he's hitting balls all over the place. It's pull side, it's oppo, it's doubles to the gaps. I mean, this guy's a real hitter. He's a real hitter, and he's a force to be reckoned with, and he's going to be really good for years to come.
I think approach is really important when you discuss Riley Greene. I think you and I talk about it, during the week all the time. And this year of his 15 homers, 5 of those homers are to left center field, 2 more to dead center. So 7 of his 15 homers are not pull side, which is really the, biggest indicator of Riley Greene swinging well. When, you and I joke about it all the time. When Riley Greene is hitting balls hard to left field, that's the best version of Riley Greene. And you're ready for lots of dangerous offensive fireworks when he's hitting the ball to left field, because the pull side becomes really, really easy. And we've seen a lot of that, especially this month where he has 5 homers. But as we discuss, you and I all the time, when Riley Greene's hitting the ball to the left, and he hit some fun homers even in the past week, high fly balls landed in the seats in Houston. I mean, there was some fun stuff, but that is the best version of Riley Greene. All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to be back in 60. All right, we're back. It's unfortunately the time of year where in the last 9 years, most Tiger fans have to start preparing themselves for, because when you're a bad team, when the trade deadline is looming, you always have to say to yourself, what am I going to do at the trade deadline? Obviously, I never like to break things into being a buyer or a seller, but it's always trying to figure out how I can improve my team by maybe leveraging some players that may not be here in the next season. Is that the nice way of explaining it out? So, as the trade deadline approaches 5 weeks from now, what do we expect? Are they going to be buyers or sellers? Who do we expect them to trade? Give me a rundown. I know it's a little early, but let's kind of do a precursor of what some of the things fans should be looking forward to as the trade line approaches.
Yeah, it's early, but it's never too early to take an early look at the trade deadline. I think the Tigers are going to be sellers. They're at a point in the season where they're so far back in the American League Central. Are you really going to bank on yourselves to make that last wild card spot? I mean, worst case scenario, let's just say, would be, here's an example, keeping Jack Flaherty to make a push for the playoffs, only to miss the wild card completely and lose out an opportunity to add, players to your organization that otherwise you wouldn't have been able to add. Like that's a colossal failure. Like that's a bad thing. That's the last thing that, the Tigers would want to do in the situation that they're in. So considering where they're at in the standings, considering what their roster looks like, considering the lack of offense that we've discussed over and over again, I fully expect the Tigers to be sellers. Speaking of Jack Flaherty, even back in spring training, I had asked somebody, what are the chances the Tigers are in first place in the AL Central at the deadline and they still trade Jack Flaherty? And I was told that there is a chance that would have happened because, again, the Tigers signed Jack Flaherty because they knew they'd be able to flip him and be able to get something for him. Now, there's also the qualifying offer that could be in play if he performs well enough, and maybe that gives the Tigers a little bit of leverage at the trade deadline. They could tell other teams, hey, we have no problem holding on to him because we'll give him the qualifying offer. He'll turn the qualifying offer down to become a free agent. And then if he signs for like more than $50 million or whatever, the Tigers are going to get a pretty nice draft pick. So basically, like, they have that in their pocket that they can maybe use for leverage. But the point is the Tigers signed Jack Flaherty to fix him and then trade him. That was the plan from the very beginning. So I fully expect the Tigers to trade Jack Flaherty at the trade deadline. Mark Canha is also on a 1-year deal. Gio Urshela is on a 1-year deal, and Carson Kelly is on a 1-year deal. Those are 3 other players that could be on the move. But Jack Flaherty, 100%, is going to be a guy the Tigers are trying to move at the deadline. I anticipate him getting moved. He's a really good pitcher. He's done great things with Chris Fetter, Robin Lund, Juan Nieves, that group. Also, hat tip to Scott Harris because he's done a really good job of developing pitching. Like, look at what he's done with Michael Lorenzen. Was able to trade him for Hao-Yu Lee at last year's trade deadline. Now he went out, identified Jack Flaherty, signed him, and is going to be able to trade him at this year's deadline. So that's where I see the Tigers going. Sellers, and then Jack Flaherty, Mark Canha, Gio Urshela, Carson Kelly, with Jack Flaherty being the prized possession on the trade market. And then, Mark, the big question becomes, the Tigers are going to trade Jack Flaherty. Okay, what type of players should they be trying to get back for Jack Flaherty? That's the big question.
Well, first of all, Andy Ibanez might be somebody also who might spur some interest at the trade deadline. He's a specialty player, come off the bench, one big swing against left-handed pitching, and to a good team because he can play multiple positions on defense, also may have some interest for people, especially in late game situations. He's kind of a really interesting situational player for a good team. So let's include him in that mix. As far as what they should look to try and acquire, I think you and I talked a little bit about this. I mean, obviously Flaherty in a class by himself for value. I'm not exactly sure who's going to be super interested. I used to mention Houston a lot with this. Houston does not have a great minor league system these days. They've promoted most of their good players, but they could use starting pitching for sure if they're going to be in the mix for a wildcard playoff spot, which you always like to think a team with that much experience at winning and as many good players as they have probably will be in the mix. The question is what you could get from a team like that. But what kind of players would the rest of those players bring in trades? Most of them are quite old or backup type of players. My theory is that if I was going to concentrate on a type of player, I think the Tigers really lack hard-throwing relievers. They mostly have, finesse relievers, control guys. Not a lot of guys that come in throwing 97, 98 plus up to 100. There are tons of these guys, the way they optimize pitchers now. Many of them probably lacking command and control, but it's something that the Lund, Fetter, Nieves, coaching staff is very, very good at optimizing pitchers. And I would be trying to get some relievers with some big arms that maybe have some command issues and try to bring in a few of those guys. They do have a
Mark,
guy.
You can sign those guys off the streets.
Well, have they? Have they signed any?
Trey Winger, go look at him. You got to be able to fix it. That's one thing. But you can find a lot of those guys that you can try to mold to throw more strikes. You can find a lot of guys with nasty sliders and big power fastballs. I mean, even go and look at the guy that they picked up, Freddie Pacheco, right? We're talking about him coming back from his Tommy John surgery. He started his rehab assignment. He's somebody who has a power fastball with a nasty slider. He's got to throw strikes, but he's someone that they just claimed off waivers from the St. Louis Cardinals, helped him rehab back from Tommy John surgery. And now at some point, maybe later on this season, he's going to get a chance to show himself in the big leagues. You can find these guys all over the place. I don't think you trade Jack Flaherty for guys like that, or you trade a Carson Kelly or a Gio Urshela, or I don't think you trade those guys for relievers that are big league relievers. Why? You can find those guys and develop them pretty much from anywhere.
Well,
that seems kind of a waste.
I think lots of teams do that. My question to you is, after Trey Winger, who do the Tigers have in their system that throws that hard? I mean, seriously, nobody. What reliever actually intrigues you besides Freddie Pacheco, who we've been waiting for a year and a half to rehab from TJ and just is starting his rehab? So, my point is, good bullpens have guys like this. And if they're available on the street, where are they? That's my question. Obviously, either not a priority or a pretty poor job of finding them. So at the same time, what do you think 34 and 35-year-old guys like Mark Canha and Gio Urshela, a backup catcher, and Carson Kelly, what do you think they actually are going to bring? Do you want to get a 18-year-old outfielder from the FCL? Is that what we're going to get? Who's 5 years away and you got a dream on? I mean, at some point in time, you have to build some system depth that you can actually play in games. So, I'm just tired of front office regimes pushing the timeline out 5 years on maybe. Let's go back
to the question. The initial question that I asked you was not about Mark Canha, Gio Urshela, or Carson Kelly. My question was, what type of player should the Tigers try to get back for Jack Flaherty?
My answer was hard-throwing relievers beyond Jack Flaherty. Jack Flaherty, I think, is the type of player that should bring something of substance. Probably you'd like to see
The question that I asked you, though, was what type of player should the Tigers try to get back for Jack Flaherty?
Okay. Well, for Jack Flaherty, I think you should expect probably a prospect that's somewhere between 75 and 100 as a top prospect, and you'd like it to be a position player. Am I going to be upset if it's a pitcher? Probably not. That's up to the Tigers to be right now scouting contenders who have a pitching need to try to understand and target a series of players that they think they can optimize. That's not for you and I to understand. That's for them to understand. And to be really blunt about it, in 22 months, what trade has this regime made that gives you any confidence that they're going to do a good job with that?
Yeah, I think again, to answer the question, I think they need to go after prospects. I think they need to go after position playing prospects. I don't think they can go after pitchers. They can develop pitchers. They can go out in the market and they can find pitchers and they can mold them, right? Look at the guys that they were in on, Luis Severino. They were in on him. They were in on Jack Flaherty. Obviously, they ended up with Jack Flaherty because Luis Severino, signed to go play for the Mets. But look at what they've done with Jack Flaherty. Look at what they did with Michael Lorenzen. Those are good signs that they can develop pitching. Look at what Jackson Jobe is doing. He's coming, right? He's on his way. Reese Olson, Like, that guy can pitch, man. Like, Reese Olson knows what he's doing. So the Tigers do have a lot of pitching depth to an extent, right? You have a real ace coming in Jackson Jobe. Tarik Skubal's on your roster. Like, I think they need to go after bats. Like, they need more offense in their organization. You look beyond Jace Young and AAA Toledo. What do the Tigers really have until you get to Max Clark and Kevin McGonigal? It's not much. It's really not much when you look at it. All right. And so I think that they're at a point where they need to go after some bats. They had a huge missed opportunity last year with Eduardo Rodriguez making that trade with the Los Angeles Dodgers that never happened. Like, that was supposed to provide an input of offense to the organization that they were able to draw upon potentially for years to come. Like, when that Eduardo Rodriguez deal fell through because he invoked his no trade clause, I talked about that as being like a franchise altering type miss, because those are bats that the Tigers are going to need to have a better offense. Like, look at what's plaguing them right now. It's not the pitching staff, it's the offense. So when it comes to trading Jack Flaherty, I think they need to get back offense. That has to be the priority. And to your point, though, like, again, what has this regime acquired? Justin Henry Malloy, Hao-Yu Lee, Matt Vierling, Nick Maton, Donnie Sands, they're gone. So, like, I get your point. I also do think that, like, the Eduardo Rodriguez trade, hopefully that doesn't come back to bite Scott Harris. Like, remember, that was a deal that was in place and it fell through. And the worst thing that could happen to Scott Harris, is an Erod 2.0 situation with Jack Flaherty, where he sets the bar really high on the value, really, really high. And teams maybe aren't interested, or teams have questions and concerns, or they're not going to meet what Scott Harris is looking for from a value standpoint. The worst thing that he could do is either A, hold on to Jack Flaherty because he doesn't get the value, because that would be completely pointless. Or B, like, I wonder if teams know, if opposing GMs, I wonder if they know that Scott Harris can't have an Erod 2.0 and he has to trade Jack Flaherty. What if everybody across the league says, yeah, I mean, we know you got to trade him. We know you got to move him. So we're really not going to give you what you're looking for. And that could put Scott Harris in a really difficult situation too. So we'll see what happens at the deadline. But what can't happen is a repeat of what happened with Eduardo Rodriguez. Now, the good thing is that there aren't the player options, and there aren't he doesn't have any no trade clause. So, like, it should be much easier to move Jack Flaherty, and there should be more teams that are interested. But at the same time, Scott Harris has to capitalize at this deadline. And I think he has to capitalize by going out and getting bats to help the offense into the future.
Well, let's, cover a couple things here. One of the best teams he could trade Jack Flaherty to, I would be flabbergasted if he was able to do it, because
the Dodgers.
Yeah. Well, how about the Baltimore Orioles? Do they need some starting pitching?
Maybe, but how about the Dodgers too? I think they're a team that could use Jack Flaherty too. And they're a team that probably would like to go after him, considering the things that they value from their pitchers. They could go after Jack Flaherty. But again, like, is there bad blood between, Scott Harris and Andrew Friedman, and maybe a deal won't? I don't know if that's the case. But my point is that Erod deal was supposed to go through and it didn't go through. And again, it's not a great look for Scott Harris. That's my opinion on it.
We've discussed this on Days of Roar last year, post-trade deadline, about the poor job of creating leverage Scott Harris did, at executing the Erod deal. Didn't really create much leverage. I don't think there's any bad blood about making a deal with the Dodgers. And as far as trading with Baltimore, who desperately needs starting pitchers and who has tons of minor league hitting, the question will be, will Baltimore be willing to reconsider having Jack Flaherty back after he pitched so poorly for them down the stretch? I mean, burn me once, burn me twice, So I think it's obviously a hugely important trade deadline for Scott Harris. Did he learn some things from last year? Let's hope so, for Scott Harris' sake, because a poorly executed trade deadline this year, there's really not a lot of stuff that Scott Harris can hang his hat on that he's done. And if you're going to start telling me about major league drafts, I'm going to start telling you Al Avila told us that for 7 years, drafted Casey Mize, Spencer Torkelson, and Matt Manning. And it's only so long you can tell yourself and tell your fan base that story. At some point in time, you have to execute something that impacts the major league team and impacts winning.
I do want to say, going back to last deadline too, Michael Lorenzen for Hao-Yu Lee, Lorenzen to the Phillies, Hao-Yu Lee to the Tigers. That has worked out pretty well. So hat tip to Scott Harris for making that move. Lee has looked really good so far in Double-A Erie this season, hitting .301 with 11 home runs, 29 walks, and 48 strikeouts in 62 games. Kind of reminds me of Colt Keith caliber production. Like, I haven't dug into the metrics, but baseline statistics, .301, 11 homers, drawing some walks, limiting the strikeouts, play second base, like play some third base too. Like, I like what I'm seeing from Hao-Yu Lee. I think that's someone to keep an eye on. And again, if that's a guy who gets to the big leagues and is able to hit and help the offense, that's a big win for Scott Harris. Like, I understand that he didn't move Eduardo Rodriguez, but the point is that he moved Lorenzen and was able to get Hao-Yu Lee. And that can be an individual win in and of itself if Hao-Yu Lee is able to come up and produce. So hat tip there. But again, this is going to be a big trade deadline for Scott Harris, especially when it comes to the way he maneuvers with Jack Flaherty.
It's very, very important. All right. I want to talk about the elephant in the room, about will the Tigers consider trading Tarik Skubal or not. But first, I want to take a break. We'll be back. All right, we're back. Let's talk about the elephant in the room and yell at each other probably, but give me your opinion. Are the Tigers going to consider trading Tarik Skubal? Should they consider trading Tarik Skubal? And, is this something that's on their agenda?
So your question, are the Tigers going to trade Tarik Skubal? The answer to that is I don't know. Should they trade Tarik Skubal? Maybe in the offseason, but not now, not at the trade deadline. I think when you look at trading a player like Tarik Skubal, if that's the move you're going to make, you have to consider a couple of things, right? You have to consider the fact that Scott Harris has already come out and said that the foundation still needs to be built before the Tigers are going to spend, which implies that the foundation is currently not built. The Tigers do not have the foundation that Scott Harris envisions them having when they're ready to spend, right? So they're not there yet, okay? That's the first thing you got to acknowledge. The second thing is that Tigers only have 2 more full seasons of Tarik Skubal, the 2025 season and the 2026 season. After that, he becomes a free agent. You also have to consider the fact that internally, there are some injury concerns with Tarik Skubal from a long-term standpoint. There are concerns, okay? And concerns that I believe would cause the Tigers not to pursue a long-term contract extension with him. Okay, so I think you take all those things, you throw them all together, and maybe it makes some sense to move Tarik Skubal, but not at the trade deadline. I think you move him in the offseason if you're going to move him at all, when MLB player for MLB player trades are more likely. Go look at what the Milwaukee Brewers did with Corbin Burnes, trading one of the best pitchers in baseball to the Baltimore Orioles for left-hander DL Hall and infielder Joey Ortiz. Both Hall and Ortiz, MLB-ready players. Only difference there in that situation is that at the time of the trade, Burnes had 1 more year of team control before hitting free agency. This offseason, Skubal will have 2 more years remaining, potentially coming off, just as good of a season, right? So more value there with Skubal considering the 2 years remaining if the Tigers were to trade him. But look at what, the Brewers and the Orioles were able to do, right? The Orioles are able to get Corbin Burnes. The Brewers were able to get DL Hall and Joey Ortiz. Joey Ortiz has been phenomenal. He's been Riley Greene caliber good this year, and he plays third base and shortstop. But at the trade deadline, when you're trying to make moves, you wouldn't trade, like for example, let's throw out the New York Yankees, right? The New York Yankees, if they wanted Tarik Skubal, and I know they don't, but if they did, they wouldn't trade Tarik Skubal for MLB-ready players, for guys that are on their roster currently, guys that are in AAA Toledo and could come up in case of an injury, because they need those players to go try to win the World Series. They would maybe be willing to part with prospects at like the low A level, the high A level, the double A level. But in terms of like their top prospects at the AAA level and their young players in the big leagues, those are guys that no contending team is going to trade at the trade deadline because they need them to try to win at the World Series, right? But in the offseason, that MLB player for MLB player trade is much more likely, which is maybe when the Tigers could consider trading Tarik Skubal. Again, if you consider the fact that they've done a great job developing pitching, and that's something that Scott Harris has been good at, going all the way back to his days with the Chicago Cubs. When he was a young executive climbing his way up the ladder, he's always had a knack for identifying pitching and then finding ways to develop it. So you trust that he's going to be able to do that moving forward. You also know that Reese Olson is here. You also know that Jackson Jobe is on the way. And those are two high-level pitchers that could be 1 and 2 in a rotation. Plus, you trust Scott Harris to go out and get pitching. Well, again, if you want to try to solve the offensive problem, the issue with the offense as soon as possible, the best way to solve that problem would probably be by trading a really good pitcher for some really good hitters that are MLB ready. But that doesn't happen at the deadline. That happens in the offseason. So that's a roundabout way of saying, I don't know if the Tigers are going to trade Tarik Skubal before he becomes a free agent. But I think if they were to trade him, the offseason would make a lot more sense than at the trade deadline.
That's a fair way to posture it. I also would like, as much as I hate the idea of trading Tarik Skubal, I mean, Scott Boris is his agent, if I remember this correctly. And almost nobody who's in the stable of Scott Boris clients sign extensions early. That's one. Two, kind of a weird parallel of the perils of pitchers. Take a great pitcher like Walker Buehler on the Dodgers. Dodgers sign him to an extension, gets his second TJ, and it's been a pretty bumpy road post second TJ for him to come back being the old version of Walker Buehler. Guys that get a second TJ really, really struggle to return to form, especially starting pitchers. And as much as we hate to have this discussion, Tarik Skubal's had TJ that's now 7 years in the rearview mirror. He's had a flexor tendon issue that he's had repaired. It's a real issue that you have to give some thought about, going forward, because Tarik Skubal is going to cost 5 years, $175 million in an extension. He is not going to be some $20 million a year pitcher. He is a $30+ million pitcher, and there are very few of those in Major League Baseball. So as much as I hate the idea of trading one of the best pitchers in baseball, I would understand it if the Tigers actually considered it. Now, the question is, what do you get back? And do you trust the guy making the trades to make a trade of that level? I tried to teach you the Rounders quote the other day, which is, after 15 minutes at the table, if you don't know who the mark is, you're the mark. And I used to bring that up, about Al Avila all the time. And I think history has proved out most of the time Al Avila was the mark. So the question is Scott Harris going to be the mark? And that's what we're going to find out at this trade deadline. Can he make a deal or can he not make a deal? All right, let's get to some other topics because it depresses me thinking about trading Tarik Skubal. Had an injury this week. Talk to me about what happened to Alex Lange. Let's go rapid fire.
Yeah, it's a bummer. Alex Lange's going to be out for the season. He had right lat avulsion, so basically the tendon ripped off the bone on his lat. And so he's going to need surgery. That's happening on Tuesday. He's out for the season. It really sucks for the Tigers bullpen because they've really struggled since April 15th. Like, they've been one of the worst 5 bullpens in baseball since April 15th. And it's because they're really struggling without swing and miss arms in that bullpen. Now, Alex Faedo is going to be coming back from a hip issue that he had. That helps because he does get some swing and miss, but Tigers relievers as a whole, they don't miss enough bats. I think you brought up the power stuff. Well, I'm going to talk about the swing and miss. Like, there's not a whole lot of that in the Tigers bullpen. I think if they want to get back to putting up zeros, they're going to have to find ways to miss more bats. I just don't know if they have the personnel to do that. As for Alex Lange, I mean, he's really fallen off. I mean, as a guy who, came into the 2023 season as the closer, he racked up 26 saves and 32 opportunities. And it's all kind of fallen off to the wayside because of command issues. Also, he's had trouble with his curveball. It's been interesting looking at the curveball metrics. If you look at the induced vertical break over the years, it used to be negative. Now it's positive. It's acting almost like a gyro slider, a slider that just hangs up in the zone right now. Like, that's how it looks. It is like a gyro slider as opposed to a true curveball that drops. So it's lost a lot of downward movement over the last few years, especially as of late. he hasn't been able to refine that curveball. You hope he's able to do it coming back from surgery, but he's eyeing 2025. Like it's command issues, it's curveball, and it's 2025 now. So he's going to get to go back to the drawing board, going to get to put everything back together. We'll see him again in 2025 spring training. He was very emotional talking about being away from the Tigers and his teammates and, his guys there. Like he's a big part of that bullpen as a whole, right? Of that group of the personalities of guys that are in the bullpen. And yeah, he got pretty emotional about it, and I don't blame him because it sucks. But we're going to see him again in 2025 spring training, and we hope he's back better than ever.
Just goes to show you about the transitory circumstances of relievers. One year you're a great reliever, the next year you're almost off the map. Happens all the time, happens every year. Literally, guys from the independent league are found, become important parts of bullpens. Guys appear out of nowhere. Tigers need to find some guys out of nowhere a little more often than they have recently. Especially maybe some guys that can generate some swing and miss. Will Alex Lange come back? Tough injury to come back from. Was having issues anyways. Got Alex Faedo, hopefully in a rehab. Should be back shortly. That's why I said to you, when you start talking about older players, older role players that you're going to trade at the deadline, maybe some bullpen arms might not be a terrible idea. So what do you, a little elephant in the room, you and I have talked about it privately and publicly, both of us, a little curious why with Akil Baddoo hitting 120, we have not seen Parker Meadows called up from AAA. Talk to me about what you're hearing, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so obviously the Parker Meadows for Akil Baddoo swap would be pretty obvious. But let me ask you this question, Mark. If you bring Parker Meadows back from AAA Toledo, you're going to want to play him. You're going to want to give him runway. You're going to want to give him opportunity, both at the plate and then also, in the field as well, because he's a great defender, more than anything, right? But if you're going to play Parker Meadows, who are you going to sit? Are you sitting Matt Vierling? Are you sitting Mark Canha? Are you sitting Gio Urshela, Wencio Perez, or Justin Henry Malloy? Who of those five guys are you going to sit? And again, I understand that maybe you say, oh, well, just sit Justin Henry Malloy. Well, the Tigers aren't going to give up on Justin Henry Malloy yet. They want to give him more at-bats to see if he can get comfortable, find his groove, and lower that strikeout rate, which is just abysmal at this point. Wencio Perez, he's done enough to be in the lineup every day, I think. I know he's gone through his ups and downs, but I think you got to keep rolling with him because he's shown an ability to hit. He's a professional hitter, and he's shown it. And I like what I see out of him. Mark Canha, obviously a veteran, got to be in the lineup. Matt Vierling, as much as you hate on Matt Vierling has been solid for the Tigers this year. When you look at what he's doing from an OPS plus standpoint, it's 106. He's above league average. He's got a 740 OPS. He's getting into the pull side more often. He's still hitting 260. Those are not bad things. So for the Tigers, I think it really came down to if Parker Meadows is going to come back, the swap for Akil Baddoo is easy. Finding him playing time is a little bit difficult when you consider the fact that, he might lay a goose egg again with the bat and hit below 200. And then it's kind of pointless to, sit guys like Justin Henry Malloy or Wencio Perez, who's, hitting well. And, you're not going to sit Matt Vierling and Colt Keith. You want to get him more and more runway and as many at-bats as possible. So, again, that's why having Malloy on the roster, a DH-only player, was always going to be really difficult for this team because they want to give their young players opportunities. And they also have Mark Canha and Gio Urshela in there. So I don't really know when Parker Meadows makes his way back because, again, the swap for Akil Baddoo is easy, but unless you want to just leave Parker Meadows on the bench most of the time, you're not really taking advantage of what he brings from a value standpoint with the defense. So it put the Tigers in a weird spot, and they never called him up.
I think you've mentioned this to me a few times. You have quietly another aspect of Parker Meadows that maybe playing into this a little bit, which is I think at the end of the month, if they wait until the 1st of July, it has something to do with his, it works in the Tigers' favor from a service time standpoint. And at this point in time, waiting another week that leverages his service time in their favor probably is playing in a little bit into whether they bring him up or not, just beside having a place for him to play.
Right. There's also the factor, too, if he's hitting fastballs in Toledo right now, he's doing a great job being on velocity. But spin is really hurting him. So it's the breaking balls that he's really, really struggling with. So, he's on the fastball great, but he's struggling with spin. So, again, if he's going to make an adjustment to try to get to that spin and not strike out as often and not struggle with those pitches, well, then he might be exposed in the fastball. He's going to be caught in between, and we're back to step one again. So there might still be some things for him to figure out at the AAA level too, in terms of being able to lay off some of that spin that's down while still being able to get on the fastballs that are up. Again, it's been spin down, fastballs up that have been the problem for him. He's covering the fastballs up, but now the spin down is really exposing him. He cannot get caught in between at the big league level. Otherwise, we're back to step one. So we'll see when we see Parker Meadows again. Maybe it is, end of July. Maybe it's not until September. I think it's going to be well before then, but we'll see.
All right, let's check in on two other Tigers on the IL. What are you hearing about Javy?
Yeah, Javy Baez has begun baseball activities in his return from lumbar spine inflammation. The Tigers need him badly. Ryan Kreidler, Zach McKinstry, not really doing it at the shortstop position, either offensively or defensively. Javy Baez is a huge upgrade defensively from both of those players. Ryan Kreidler looked like a deer in the headlights his first week, in the big leagues. He settled in a little bit more defensively, but offensively, he's been a complete disaster. Zach McKinstry is a huge step down from Baez defensively, and also McKinstry's hitting pretty much the same. Like, it's not great. So Tigers need Javy Baez back. He's beginning, baseball activities. He's doing all of his work in Lakeland right now. We'll see when we get him back in Detroit. I'm interested to see when that is. I know he's working with, some hitting people down there in the Tampa area. He's going to Lakeland to do ground balls and other activities. So again, whatever they got going down there, whatever they got, whatever the secret sauce is to try to get Javy back, hopefully it works out both for them like an injury standpoint and then also for a performance standpoint. Maybe this is another thing they're trying to get him back on track.
I'm sure he'll see some minor league at-bats before he comes back to Detroit. So
definitely.
I'm sure maybe in the next week we'll hear something about the timing, regarding when that might happen. All right. Kerry Bonds Carpenter, pretty severe injury. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, so he's beginning baseball activities finally in his return from a lumbar spine stress fracture. And he also just announced that he's going to be a dad. So shout out to Kerry, hat tip on fatherhood. As far as recovery from the injury, the timeline looks like it's going to be potentially the end of July, probably post All-Star break for sure. Hopefully end of July. That's returning to the Tigers. Hopefully he can get into a rehab assignment maybe a little bit sooner than that. We'll see. It's kind of like a week and a half to 2 weeks of baseball activities before the rehab assignment starts. Maybe he gets the rehab assignment going, right there before the All-Star break and is able to, finish it out, post All-Star break, and then obviously come back to the Tigers at the end of July. They really miss his bat. It's a huge bat against right-handed pitching, and they can use him back. So shout out to Kerry on fatherhood. Glad to see him back doing baseball activities. Those are really good things for the Tigers.
All right. Couple things on the minor league side. Jace Young, wrist injury. What do you know about that?
Yeah, not a whole lot. That's the big thing is like, how long is he going to be out and what does this look like long term? Nobody really knows. The Tigers haven't given any information about that to this point. We do know that it is a wrist injury. And again, right wrist soreness, how sore is the wrist? That's the big question, right? And is there anything like dislodged inside the wrist? Anything like beyond just some soreness that needs a little bit of rest? We don't really know yet. But Jace Young hitting .270 with 11 home runs, 47 walks, and 64 strikeouts in 64 games with AAA Toledo. It was interesting, actually, because the Tigers, again, he was scratched from Thursday's starting lineup, and everybody on Tigers Twitter was thinking that he was going to get called up. And did a little data dive on Jace Young. I think this is worth noting. He's hitting .235 with a 181 expected batting average on fastballs that register at least 93 miles an hour, which is actually worse than Parker Meadows and Spencer Torkelson down there with the Mud Hens. And then you say, okay, well, what about fastballs at 95 plus? Let's take it a step further. On those pitches, Jace Young is hitting 154 with a 166 expected batting average. That's a real problem to monitor when he comes back from the wrist issue. Whenever he does, is will Jace Young ever get on velocity, specifically 95 plus? That's something to watch because, again, if you're not on 95 plus in the big leagues, you're screwed.
Yep, pretty much the story of almost every good hitter in AAA throughout the entire prospect universe, not just indigenous to Detroit, but obviously something that the Tigers prospects have had real issues with. So it's pretty tough to hit with a bad wrist, though. So hard to say how long this has been bothering Jace Young, be curious to see how long. I'm sure he got a shot in his wrist and how long they lay him off and how his health is when he comes back. All right, let's touch on Tigers' best prospect, Jackson Jobe. So now he had 2 rehab starts, looking very Jackson Jobe-ish in the second one, which means pretty unhittable. Should be going up to Erie shortly. Give us a quick rundown of what's up there.
Yeah, you summarized it, man. Jackson Jobe coming back from the left hamstring strain. He's made 2 rehab assignment starts, and the final destination for him coming off the rehab assignment was always going to be Double-A Erie, and it does seem like he's ready to make that jump now. He gave up 2 runs in his first rehab start across 2 innings, and then 3 perfect innings in his next outing with 4 strikeouts. So, again, you mentioned unhittable. He didn't walk anybody either and struck out 4, and he was brilliant, just brilliant. He threw 29 pitches in his first rehab start and then 32 pitches in his second rehab start. So the Tigers, again, still really slow playing Jackson Jobe. They want him to get to that 100 innings mark by the end of the season. That's the goal for him. Ryan Garko had talked to us about that here on the Days of Roar podcast. That still seems to be in play. Jackson Jobe seemingly is going to be moved up to Double-A Erie next. I would have to think that's the next step for him. And, once he gets there, he's going to have to spend his time there. Like it's again, that was the big thing, was like, is he going to be in the big leagues in 2024, 2025? Well, before the injury, he was not even knocking on the door for AAA Toledo yet. From what I was told, is that he was not knocking on that door yet. So even though he was pitching well in Erie, and even though he struggled with the walks early, and then he was pretty dominant in his final 3 outings. Like, remember, it was a .083 opponent batting average in his last 3 starts before the injury. He was really good, but he still wasn't close to Toledo. I think 2025 is more likely for Jackson Jobe at this point than 2024, especially considering the trajectory of the Tigers. If they're not in the mix in September and they're not fighting for a playoff spot, what's the point?
Well, the point might be if he's going to be in the rotation in 2025 and and they're going to move Jack Flaherty, and God knows what else could happen to the Tigers rotation. Wouldn't shock me. He gets some time in September, and it's pretty much the only thing he can do to get to 100 innings. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Jackson Jobe in September. This was a normal org, knowing Scott Harris, and he's slow walking things for 20, maybe not, but we're going to see. All right, it's time for us to get the heck out of here. Hopefully, we'll see better things this week. I want to give a shout out to our sports editor, Kirk Crawford, who is moving on to do big things for Gannett in Florida. Was a big part of me being a part of this. Has always treated both of us great. Want to wish him the best of luck. I know you want to do that too. So shout out to Kirk. I want to remind everybody to please rate, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, etc. As always, you can always find us embedded in every Evan Petzold article at thefreep.com. We love everybody that's been listening this year. We really appreciate it. I'd like to thank the Free Press editor, Nicole Avery Nichols, our producer, the man, Robin Chan, who saves us, as I tell you, every damn week. Love to my grandson. Got a birthday coming up. Can't wait to give him about 25 presents. And to the spectacular Savannah Petzold, who's got a chance to see her husband for almost a week in a row, which has been nice. To everybody, I'd like to say, peace.